Social media is driving everybody a little crazy, but it is going to drive you extra crazy if you believe stuff like this. Hello, I'm Sabrina Joy Stevens. I'm a writer and political communication strategist who is very critical of the political industry that I come from, and particularly of the overlapping media, academic, and political subsets of that industry that I've nicknamed Groupthink Inc. I started Leaving Groupthink Inc. to encourage, embolden, and equip folks to resist ideological groupthink so we can better defend life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And today, I want to explore some of the sloppy thinking and decision making that leads even smart, well intentioned people to cling to bad ideas that make themselves and others miserable. I started mulling on this a few months ago when I was working on a feature about the left-right happiness gap that was published by the Boston Globe. And it's been on my mind ever since because I keep seeing social media content and trending topics that inadvertently point to some of the reasons for this mental health gap, particularly related to this trend of cutting off relationships over politics. So I wanted to dig a little deeper into the underlying social, emotional, and mental dynamics at play there, because I think it helps us understand at least one aspect of why there's a mental health disparity between left and right-leaning partisans and between activists and regular people more generally. Though snubbing is a universal social practice that's pretty much as old as socializing itself, there's a reason that is disproportionately left-leaning partisans who cut people out of their lives over politics specifically, or a few reasons, but we can just explore a few today. And that's because this behavior is encouraged and reinforced in left-leaning social networks. But to use a bit of activist speak, that is problematic for many reasons. To understand why, let's analyze a widely shared meme about ending relationships over politics that exemplifies 5 cognitive distortions and logical fallacies that are really common in these social spheres, especially among folks employed and influenced by group thinking. You can probably spot more than 5 logical fallacies or distortions here. If you do, you let me know in the comments. Also, just a standard not all disclaimer right here. On the one hand, yes, all kind of, because all of us fall into some of these mental pitfalls from time to time. That's just part of being human and having a human brain. I'm very well aware all kinds of people can and do fall into groupthink. But if the beliefs and narratives common to your group happen to be ones that make people miserable, then these kinds of mental errors that are universal to humans are going to have worse emotional and social consequences for your particular group of people. But again, not all, right? If it doesn't apply to you and your particular progressive group of friends, then I'm not talking about you, okay? But if you're mad about it, it's probably because it does apply to you a little bit, so just do better. Anyway, with that all aside, let's prepare to cringe as we dig into this thing. All right, so here's what it says. If I remove myself from your life over politics, it is not because we disagree. It's because your values and beliefs are a threat to the existence of people I love. Yo, like, that escalated so quickly. So the first cognitive distortion that we should talk about is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is when you treat your feelings as though they're facts or as though they are evidence proving something true or false. This is an issue because feelings can be good indicators, but they are terrible dictators. Feelings are fallible. They have their place. They're there to tip us off to things in our life we need to pay attention to. But if we don't use critical thinking skills to double or triple check the information and assumptions that are causing our feelings, we can end up making some pretty bad decisions. Group thinkers often hold the misperception that their way of seeing a situation or dealing with people is the only legitimate way to care or to show empathy. But in the real world, people can care similarly deeply about a problem, yet differ greatly on what they think should be done about it. For example, a few people might feel strongly about immigration issues and might really feel for people facing terrible situations in other countries. One of them might think that that means we should show mercy to people who cross the border illegally. Another might think it's cruel to incentivize people to sneak into our country, knowing that they're going to be at higher risk of being assaulted, exploited, and live in constant fear of deportation. Someone else might feeling just as bad for these folks, but recognize that it's dangerous and burdensome for people already living here, and it's unfair to legal immigrants. So again, people having the same sense of empathy for immigrants, but radically different responses to this issue of illegal immigration. Emotions alone cannot tell us the right response to complex social dilemmas and policy issues. But because Groupthink Inc. amasses money and power by trading in simplistic, emotionally manipulative narratives, their supporters often end up believing that anyone who disagrees with their preferred policies or politicians doesn't care about the people affected by a certain issue. That's a lie. Unfortunately, when people conflate the depth of their feelings with truth, it's harder for them to recognize and reject emotionally charged lies. Emotional reasoning can also trick us into thinking we know more than we do about other people's motivations, which brings me to another cognitive distortion we see in this meme, mind reading. Of course, when people do this, they're not actually mind reading. They're assuming they know what someone else is thinking, even when they have no evidence to back up their assumptions. This often goes hand in hand with emotional reasoning because people engaging in emotional reasoning are usually responding to their negative assumptions about others' values and beliefs instead of their actual values and beliefs. Now, are there some people out there who are genuinely hateful? Sure. But more often than not, the controversies that activists are reacting to are caused by activists making unreasonable demands on other people and then demonizing people who object to their boundary crossing behavior. I need to point out that this is pretty ironic because there's a really high overlap between people who share content like this and people who tout their own empathy when hawking their political positions. But actual empathy would motivate them to try to understand people's actual motivations and concerns, even if they continue to disagree with their preferred outcomes. Instead, they're cutting people off with other viewpoints without truly seeking to understand what is motivating those views. Noting the 6-colored rainbow hearts in this meme, it's pretty safe to assume that it's meant at least partially to defend people that activists lump into the LGBTQ+, etc. acronym. But while folks in that acronym have faced mistreatment, most of the recent situations that activists are calling attacks are actually common sense attempts to rein in activist extremism. It's things like the Supreme Court rightly upholding Tennessee's law banning gender drugs and surgeries for minors, which irreversibly damage kids' bodies, have no scientific backing, and only are supported by a false consensus that's been manufactured by ideologically captured professional organizations. It's people objecting to public indecency and sexual harassment during pride parades, or to sexually explicit books in children's schools and libraries. It's women speaking out against being housed with men in women's prisons, or finally receiving the titles they earned after being displaced by men in female sports. Excusing intrusive behavior by claiming it's a protest against oppression is blatant manipulation. It's also another kind of logical fallacy known as special pleading. Yet when people object to special pleading or the manipulation that activists are dealing out, those activists then call them bigoted for not silently accepting harassment and displacement in the name of equality. This makes a mockery of real civil and human rights movements. One of the biggest breakthroughs for me personally, when I stopped letting left-wing groupthink dictate my thoughts, was dropping the kinds of negative assumptions about what motivates other people's disagreement. When you assume that people must be bigoted or hateful because they disagree with your political views, you're teaching yourself that you're surrounded by haters and bigots. Remember, your mind is designed to keep you safe. It can't help but respond to your beliefs because it's trying to help you avoid potential threats in your environment. So if you habitually tell yourself that you're surrounded by bigots even when you aren't, you're going to put yourself in a state of chronic hypervigilance and anxiety. There is no reason to live like that when you don't have to. Just have the humility to let other people reality check your assumptions. And speaking of assumptions, that brings us to the Strawman fallacy. It's distorting someone else's views or positions and then attacking or reacting to your own distortions instead of their actual views or positions. This kind of uncharitable assumption inspires overreaction, and it undermines our ability to address real issues. In situations where you're just wrong, reacting to a straw man makes you needlessly miserable. And in situations where there's a real issue to overcome, reacting to a straw man undermines your ability to communicate and problem solve effectively. The emotional reasoning we just talked about is often an overreaction to strongman arguments, like the idea that anyone who objects to men and women's prisons or gender drugs and surgeries for kids is a transphobe. Another example often happens again around immigration, right? The uncharitable strawman argument that a lot of progressives make is that anyone who opposes illegal immigration opposes immigration generally because they hate immigrants and they're a racist. That's a huge leap. A majority of Americans object to illegal immigration while welcoming legal immigration. Strawman fallacies are often a symptom of another cognitive distortion known as black and white thinking, sometimes also called all or nothing thinking, which is looking at situations in extreme absolutist terms with no nuance. We see it in this meme because the person is talking about leaving someone's life over politics. Now, if someone is actually dangerous, as in they've actually engaged in violent or threatening behavior, that would be the reason to remove them from your life, regardless of politics. So if this exit is only happening because of politics, chances are this person is assuming that someone else supporting a policy or a candidate they don't approve of automatically holds destructive values or beliefs. Instead of considering that someone might have legitimate reasons for their choices, access to information they don't have, or is just sincerely mistaken and is voting in error instead of malice, they're making this black and white straw man assumption about their values and beliefs. Making black and white all or nothing assumptions, either you agree with a certain political agenda or you hate people I love, again, fuels that anxiety-inducing sense of threat and hypervigilance. And it makes it really difficult, if not impossible, to have respectful, productive conversations with different kinds of people. And the more you self-segregate among people who share your exact political views, the more likely you are to fall into this kind of thinking, cutting yourself off from the very kinds of people who can best help you reality check your beliefs. As I say pretty often, no individual or like-minded group is right all the time. So if you surround yourself by people who think just like you, you're also surrounding yourself with people who are wrong just like you, which is a really bad situation to be in. The other big problem with black and white all or nothing thinking is that when things don't go our way, it frequently leads to catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is exaggerating the negative consequences or outcomes of a certain situation or decision, or assuming the worst will happen if things don't go the way you think they should, like if people don't vote the way you think they should or believe what you think they should. Catastrophizing might as well be called the Despair and Destruction Express, because if you think like this, you will be depressed pretty much all the time. Look at that meme again. Notice how quickly the person jumps from values and beliefs to a threat to the existence of people I love. The ideas in another person's head are not by themselves capable of ending anyone's existence. That is an extreme exaggeration. Beliefs influence behavior for sure, but there are many, many steps between values and beliefs and another person ceasing to exist. Also, as we've already gone over, in most cases, this just isn't true. They're often making inaccurate judgments about other people's values and beliefs and then jumping to wildly exaggerated conclusions as a result. Another irony here is that insofar as a person might hold views that would be destructive if taken to their logical extreme, the best way to deal with that is to outcompete their views in the public square. But it's really hard to do that if you don't understand what they believe or if you misrepresent their beliefs so badly that undecideds reject your distorted strawman arguments against them. A lot of activists are increasingly sabotaging their ability to effectively contend for political power because they refuse to listen to people who don't think exactly like them and therefore can't communicate with people who don't think exactly like them. By spending most of the 2010s through 2024 excommunicating people with reasonable critiques on issues like immigration and gender, progressives force voters to make a choice between them and someone they feel is really extreme on those issues. And because they stayed committed to stances that have caused huge problems for millions of people, most people chose their opposition. Yet instead of taking effective action against him, they're doing things like this. They're cutting off friends and family members, which only makes them more miserable while undermining their ability to reach out to other kinds of people and to withstand whatever societal crises loom on the horizon. The truth is, life is hard no matter who's in office. Social and economic issues are complex, so we have to take thoughtful and evidence-driven approaches instead of letting emotional reasoning and sloppy thinking guide our actions. There are opportunists all along the political continuum who are all too happy to exploit your emotions to gain money and power at your expense. Divide and conquer is also a really old manipulation tactic. And so if you or people you love are starting to cut ties over political differences, that is a glaring clue that you or they are falling into a trap. So how do we overcome this? First, we need to question simplistic, emotionally laden narratives, and we need to reject emotionally manipulative organizations and media outlets. Let logic and evidence guide your political decision making instead of following what's trendy among your in group. It's also important to honor viewpoint diversity in your relationships. You're not always right, and so it is dangerous to self-segregate into groupthink bubbles. We need to prioritize real-world relationships and practical skills over politics. These are what will sustain you through hard times when the people pushing these simplistic political narratives are long gone. One of the biggest fictions pushed by our political industry is the idea that politics is the only way to affect change in the world. Ironically, they often do this as a way of tricking you into giving them your money or feeling dependent on them, while undermining your ability to affect change in the areas where you actually have the most influence, like your home and your closest relationships. Never forfeit real relationships with people who actually care about you over stuff you hear from people who don't even know or care that you exist. But enough from me. I want to hear from you. Have politics gotten in the way of your relationships? Or has it undermined your mental health? Are you seeing sentiments like this in your social media feeds? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.